Hello, welcome to another episode of Live Cost Construction Experience. Delighted this week to be joined by Rob Fox, who is a chartered engineer with over 20 years experience now for one of Ireland's largest main contractors. In 2016, Rob established Soy Passport, the easy way for main contractors and property managers to source, evaluate, procure and manage subcontractors and suppliers. Looking forward to getting into more about all of that. But for the meantime, Rob, you're very welcome. Good to have you here.
Yeah, thanks, Kieran. It's great to be on at last.
We've had a couple of goals at this to try and get it done, so it's good to finally get it over the line. Yeah. Always like to kick off with a bit of get people to understand who it is we're speaking to and a bit of a background and sort of your relationship with construction. Where did all that begin? I suppose is a good place to start.
It's always good to give a bit of background and. I suppose, my journey in construction started off, I'm a civil engineer originally, so I studied civil engineering and went and did civil engineering on site for a while and enjoyed it, but eventually found main contracting, and I just found that more interesting, to be honest with you. No disrespect to civil engineering, but it can be a little bit repetitive. But what I loved about main contracting was just there's so much going on. It's so diverse and there's so many parts to the puzzle. So I spent about 20 years, as you say, in main contracting. I was working as a contracts manager for one of the largest main contractors in Ireland for a good while. And it was great. I loved construction. I still love construction. And, it's the people in construction that, make construction, and it's the relationships of those people. And, construction is great. It's a bit of a mad industry at times, but it's a great industry. But I suppose, after spending 20 years effectively on site or managing different projects, I felt I needed to do something different, but also I wanted to try and help some way, if that makes sense. For me, the biggest thing in construction is the relationship between main contractors and subcontractors. So that's essentially, Kieran, why I set up Soy Passport, was to try and see, what can I do with some technology to try and help improve that relationship for both sides.
And was that with, I suppose you obviously seen a set of problems while working with, is it what Walls? Was it your
yeah, it was with Walls, and then with Walls for a good few years as well. Yeah.
And I suppose what you were contracts manager, or you were still involved on this?
I was a contracts manager, but I suppose even though I was a contracts manager and I might have been running 3 or 4 or 5 jobs any time, I was still involved being on site and getting to know the subcontractors and being part of the procurement process, selecting subcontractors, which for me is probably the most important step of any construction project. But so it would have been still fairly hands-on, even though I was running a number of jobs, it's still been fairly hands-on.
What set of problems do you remember having when you're in that role? Do you remember, what are we going back here? Is it 4 years ago since you left that?
3 years ago.
3 years.
3 coming up in 4 years ago. Yeah.
And what were the day-to-day issues? Can you remember that you were having in there that you felt technology could solve?
Yeah, and I suppose the main challenge I suppose I found in construction was that trying to, every time you had a new project, you had to try and get together a new set of subcontractors to build that project. And and on the surface that kind of seems straightforward, but as and everybody knows in construction, every job is different. So you don't just bring along the same set of subcontractors you did for the last one, because the last job might have been a healthcare job and the next one is a residential project. So this idea of trying to make sure that the subcontractors that were taken on for the job were a good fit for the job, and that the job was a good fit for them too, which is really important. People sometimes look at this, particularly as a main contractor, they look at it through the lens of, are these guys going to do a job for me? But it's important for the subcontractor to make sure that the job is a good fit for them too. And, at the start of the job, as Kieran, everybody knows construction, it all happens very quickly. And sometimes, subcontractors are brought on the jobs too quickly, too early. Sometimes maybe they might be a brilliant subcontractor, but they mightn't just be a good fit for that job. So that was one of the frustrations for me, is that, trying to make sure that, everybody who arrived on a site was a good fit for the job, and that everybody could make money from the job.
Mm-hmm. And were you directly involved in the selection process then for these subbies as they were coming on?
Yeah, they were, and I would have been directly involved with many of the quantity surveyors and the project managers as part of that. process. And what I always felt, Kieran, as part of it is that there's lots of brilliant subcontractors out there, but they're not all brilliant at communicating what they do, at telling main contractors what they do. And very often that's why some of the bigger companies get the jobs, because they're better at saying this is what we do, and they have all the branding, they have all the marketing. But you have fantastic companies that just find it very hard to actually communicate. So a lot of time those companies get overlooked. And we used to spend a lot of time trying to find new companies and trying to get to know them. But to be honest with you, it always just took too long to do it, because there was never enough time in the first place. But also when you found a new subcontractor, you found their website or whatever it was, you go, I kind of get a sense of what they're doing. And then you might try and ask a bit more information, and time would just run out. And you'd say, okay, listen, we know these guys over here. Maybe we'll just go back to them. And, so that used to frustrate me that, as a main contractor, we weren't maybe getting to work with more of the subcontractors that are out there, and that those subcontractors weren't getting an opportunity just because there was this barrier to being able to get across, all the great stuff that they do.
And was that where it all spun out from? So like, was that where the idea for Soy Passport came from? Like, I mean, what was the problem that you set out to solve when you initially said, I'm going to go and set up Soy Passport?
Yeah, it was a good question. Like all of these things here, over a few years, they evolve a little bit, the first idea. But the kernel of what we do is still in the first idea, which is essentially trying to, match main contractors with subcontractors. But part of that is trying to introduce them. So part of the service that we provide is, trying to introduce main contractors to subcontractors and vice versa. But we do it, and sometimes we call it's a bit more like a dating website, than an introductory service, because, so much is done in digital these days. That's where relationships are certainly started a lot of the time is online. Yeah. So, our platform is around the idea of helping the subcontractors put better information, on the platform about themselves that would, let main contractors go in, have a look and kind of go, okay, yeah, you're the type of contractor that we should be working with. We don't know you, but I can see that your experience, I can see all the different things that you've done, design teams you worked with. So that was the original part of it, was kind of a, platform where we would be able to help main contractors source subcontractors.
So the subcontractors would jump online to Soy Passport, they create a profile, they, is it like stuff like in previous projects, company information, insurance, all that type of stuff?
Yeah, and it's, all that information there's lots of that information, and initially some of that information is put up. I suppose what we try and then help the main contractors is, once there's some information about the subcontractors on the platform, we help the mains to start the relationship with the subcontractors, and that is a getting to know you sort of process. So they can ask questions of the subcontractor. Can you tell me, your latest experience? Can you tell me what's the largest job you do? What's the smallest job you do?
Okay.
Because when main contractors are looking at subcontractors, they're trying to say, okay, this job I have today is 10 million. The next job might be 100 million. I've got to try and understand whether even from the size of this company, are they big enough, or are they too big for this particular job? So that's part of the getting to know process. And that just allows, the main contractor to make sure they're talking to the right subcontractors, because, a lot of time gets wasted in main contracting, and for both sides, for the subcontractors as well, where main contractors send out tenders to subcontractors. Sometimes subcontractors are getting it going, I don't do that. That's not what I do, and it's kind of, they're looking at all this stuff and they're getting tons of tenders in. So we help the main contractors kind of distill it down a bit. So hopefully when the subcontractor gets a tender through Soy Passport, they provide enough information, and if they get that tender, it's relevant to them, which is a good start, to try and sort out, what is relevant to them. So
okay, so on the main contracting side, you're providing a platform with efficiency. It's like, as you rightly highlighted, finding the right subcontractors for the right project at the right time, and availability, of course, would fall into that as well.
Yes.
That's an efficiency play. Being able to then tender on the platform as well, so push the tenders out.
Yeah.
And then on the subcontractor side, you're obviously helping them guys have a profile, be found, be in the mix, I suppose. Yeah. Usually with these things, there's a lot of time I find that it'll be focused on one particular section. Are you equally targeting the subcontractors and the main contractors equally, or is it more on one side and then the others will come?
Yeah, it's more so. I mean, the service that we provide is essentially to the main contractors, and it's around supply chain relationship management, I suppose, is what we call it.
Yeah.
And it involves all those things of finding subcontractors, getting to know them, and tendering to them. You mean the subcontractors can be found through Soy Passport, and there is an opportunity for subcontractors to beef out their profiles, and we can talk a bit at the end about how subcontractors can get in touch about doing that. But because the more information they can provide to the main contractors, the better chance to have of getting on the list and eventually maybe getting the job. But it's essentially a service for main contractors and also for property owners. So companies that would own a portfolio of properties that they have to maintain. So we work with those type of companies too.
Okay. And I remember initially when we talked originally, you had talked about blockchain. Is that still relevant in this case?
Yeah, no, blockchain is still relevant. I mean, blockchain is one of those things that I'm never sure whether to talk about because it kind of can turn people off. But blockchain is a very powerful technology. It really revolves around a central source of the truth, which is important when you're sharing information in both directions. Knowing that you can trust that information and it's verifiable and all those things is really important.
Yeah.
There's other technologies that you can use to do a lot of that without blockchain. But listen, blockchain, I think is going to be a part of the future technology, but it's probably not that relevant right now.
Yeah. It'll have its day. I mean, a lot for I suppose a hell of a lot more about blockchain than I do, but I mean, just to give people an idea, it is the core of where the likes of Bitcoin, I suppose, will probably be the most famous one you could point to. Technologies that have been built on blockchain, and I suppose when it came, a lot of people, I think, in construction said, "Oh, that might solve our payments problem." And a bit like AR and VR and stuff like that, everyone thinks, "Oh, okay, this is going to come in 2 years' time, and that'll probably solve our payments problem." And really, the truth is that by the time we solve or have any type of automation around payments in construction, it's probably another, our day could even be gone.
Yeah. Listen, I mean, blockchain could solve the problem around payments and automating payments. Like today, it's just that there's bigger problems to be solved in construction before you automate payments. So, to be honest with you, I used to give presentations of blockchain, and I used to say that automated payments using blockchain will happen when pigs fly, because, like really at the end of the day, if you look at the relationship, particularly between main contractors and subcontractors at the moment, there's very few quantity surveyors out there that will want a payment to go out to a subcontractor through an automated process. And as good as that automated process might be, it's just they lose that level of control. And it's and payments in construction come down to like how much work is completed, and how do you measure how much work is completed. And there are great technologies out there, that including Evercam are doing some work on this, which is another good Irish construction technology company. How do you monitor the progress on site? And then that becomes a source of truth. There's 1,000 meters of pipework put in, or there's not, but it's a while away before that all becomes automated.
And one of the biggest issue is that the person actually making the payment might not want to pay in that particular payment cycle, and therefore when it's automated, that control process is taken away from them. So I feel I agree with you that there's a bigger set of problems that need to be addressed before we even look at that. You've flipped over then from let's call it an operational type guy in construction into now an MD in a tech company. What's been the biggest challenge so far, do you think, in that transition?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I suppose, I mean, yourself, Kieran, when you start your own company, you have to be everything. You're the finance director, you're the operations director, you're everything. So, as much as, if you've working in construction 20 years, construction well, but there's all the other jobs that have to be done, that are really important. But I suppose, the biggest transition, I suppose, is that, we're a bit like yourselves, we're essentially starting a new type of business. It's not a service that really exists out there at the moment. So there's a lot of time going around trying to explain to people what the vision is, and for them to kind of share their thoughts with you on that. And, you spend a lot of time really talking to people. So we spend a lot of time talking to main contractors and subcontractors. And really, the biggest thing for me since I left is how much I have learned and how much I'm still learning about construction.
Yeah.
Because when you get out into it, when you break outside of the, the day-to-day, what you normally do, and start having different conversations with people, you kind of go, yeah, all those assumptions you made about how construction works, a lot of them are true, but a lot of them actually you figure out, that's just not the case. And, so coming from a main contractor background, I have a fair idea, obviously, how main contractor works, but it's been great to talk to subcontractors to see what sort of pain points they have. And, so that's the biggest change, is just actually you spend most of your time actually talking to people about what their problems are. And as you know, the point of technology is to try and solve those problems, not add to them. Some technologies just make a bad system worse, but technology is really about making everybody's life easier.
You spend a lot of the time, I know, like we're coming from sort of similar positions here, where we've sort of been in, let's call it, in the trenches, so to speak, and then you're out of there, and next thing you're into this different role where a lot of it in the early stages actually R&D, and it still is actually. It's all like, what's out there, what could we use to solve it, and that takes a lot of talking. And I know I struggled with it actually initially, is to say, is this even really work? Am I really like, it's because it's so slow, you're not getting anywhere, you're not achieving anything. Whereas from the world we come from, you still sit back at the end of most day and you can actually see results. This is what I got done today. And I suppose I struggled in the early stages with, are we actually gaining any traction here? What's going on? But you're just deep in R&D. That was one of the big ones for me anyway. So like with Soy Passport, then that was sort of you personally. What do you think the biggest challenge been as a company to try and get the wheels turning and getting Soy Passport off the ground?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest challenge, I suppose, is just, as you say, building up the technology, but it's building up the relationships. Like in every industry, it's about relationships. So we spent a lot of time, as a main contractor for all those years. I actually found when I came out of working in main contracting, I didn't actually know that many other main contractors. So I actually spent a huge amount of time actually having to go out and find, the surveyors and the commercial directors and the operations directors and main contractors and procurement people, and get out there and get talking to them. And, and part of that challenge was you had to have something to show them. So, we had our, as you know, they call it the minimal viable product, but you're going out saying like, this is a vision of the future, and you're trying to get them to buy into that. But the biggest challenge is, that, as you said already, that takes, that doesn't take months, that takes years, because you go out, you talk to somebody, you bring it back, you try and bake that into what you're providing, and you keep talking, you keep improving the system, you keep building on, and eventually, you get to a stage where people are kind of going, that makes sense, that is something I need to have. So it just takes a long time. You're spending, you think you're selling the product out there, for the first couple of years, but when you look back, you're really just in it's research and it's R&D, and that's a challenge. Just everything takes much longer.
How ready do you think subcontractors in particular are for technology and the changes that we think are coming?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think subcontractors, a lot more ready for technology than a lot of people think. I just think that a lot of technology that's out there and being presented to them or trying to be sold to them is not that relevant to them or that useful. So like, subcontractors are very smart people. The people who set up subcontractors are entrepreneurs. They're smart people. They don't get going and they don't build up a business without being very tuned in. So if somebody puts something in front of them, and if it's technology and it makes sense to them and they can see the value in it, I don't think there's any great hurdle just because it's technology. And there still are some companies and some people who are a little bit afraid of technology, but that's becoming smaller and smaller. So I think if you have a good value proposition for subcontractors or for main contractors, they get it. And if you make it easy to use and it looks simple, and I could do that sitting in the van, or I could do that wherever I have to do my business, they will buy it, but you have to be giving something and selling something that's of value.
I agree. If you present them a solution to a problem that's going to improve efficiency, save money, you're going to get all ears. I think a lot of the reports around the negativity towards our subcontractors ready to come along the journey with, the tier one contractors from a technology stance has been because we're in this BIM conversation where a lot of subcontractors actually don't find BIM all that relevant to them. It doesn't save them an initial saving on the bottom line today or tomorrow. It's actually something that we're planning for in the future and probably more benefit to the main contractor on that particular project. So I think that the the narrative probably has to be switched away from, well, are we talking about BIM? Or are we talking about day-to-day operational technology that can actually save the bottom line? What's your thoughts around the BIM conversation?
I could say, don't get me started.
All right.
I mean, you hit the nail on the head, Kieran. For me, the conversation around construction technology is completely overshadowed by the conversation about BIM. And don't get me wrong, I think BIM is a fantastic technology. I think when it becomes, so pervasive, that everybody's using it, and everybody's engaged in it, it'll be fantastic. And it does have lots of benefits right now. But, construction technology does not equal BIM, and BIM does not equal construction technology. And unfortunately, however this has happened, even the government, at the government level, they think that we can solve construction. If only everybody in construction used BIM, that would solve all the problems in construction. So, and there's lots of great advocates of BIM out there, and don't get me wrong, it has lots of benefits. But to be honest with you, BIM is really only relevant to, the top tier type of subcontractors. And by that I mean, I suppose, the contractors like the M&E contractors, facade contractors, who have to engage with this because they're part of the design process. But for the majority of subcontractors, they would say to you, and would still say, listen, give me a printed out drawing that tells me everything I need to build, and that's just fine for me. So in construction technology, I suppose, a lot of the technology is foisted on the subcontractors from the main contractors. So whether it's BIM, now to be fair to the main contractors, BIM is foisted on them by the clients and by the design team. So they're just kind of rolling in with what they have to do. But a lot of the main contractors, adopt platforms, adopt technologies, and then they expect all of the subcontractors to engage with those technologies. And some of them are better at providing, some value to the subcontractors. Like, oh yeah, this is great. This company's using this technology. And when I work on their jobs and I use their technology, it actually makes my life easier. But I think what a lot of main contractors forget is that, subcontractor could be dealing with 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 main contractors, and now they're having to engage with 4 or 5 different platforms, and that's a bit of a nightmare, to be honest with you.
Yeah. There's a real problem there whereby at tier 1 level, and you'll be well aware of this, that there's brilliant technology available, really efficient stuff, has been around probably a long time, way before we even engaged in this construction technology space. There's companies that have been doing this for a long time. And the problem is that as technology advances and these companies are around a long time are able to implement that pretty quickly, and then the main contractors can adopt it pretty quickly, and we get all these great advances, are the subcontractors actually going to be in a position to keep up with that? And what happens then if we get our main contractors tearing off ahead with really advanced technology and the subcontractors don't come along with them? Is it even of any benefit to us, where we've got this massive divide then between top and bottom? So I suppose there is a challenge there. How can we ensure that whatever the industry as a whole moves with technology, and not just one element of the industry being the top tier contractors?
Yeah, I mean, and what happens is in that situation is that if the main contractor uses all this technology and there's a sense that they're pulling away, I mean, main contractors, only survive on the basis of having their subcontractors come with them, and work with them. And if technology becomes a barrier to working with each other, that's a real problem. And the difficulty is that you see it already, that some subcontractors go, I don't care what platform you're using for your field management software. I'm just going to email you in that piece of information because I haven't got time to engage with all these things. So, and that would be a shame, because a lot of those platforms and technologies are very useful. It's just that they're not designed with the subcontractor, with the supply chain in mind. I mean, at the end of the day, most technology companies are selling their services to the bigger companies, to the bigger main contractors and property developers, whoever it might be. So all they think about is, how does this make the main contractor's life easier? And, because I'm selling it to these guys, so I have to impress these guys. What they don't do is they don't design the user experience for the subcontractors. But if you're a main contractor and, getting your subcontractors to use your technology is probably 80% of the job, unless you're giving them something that is easy to use and useful to them, they won't use it. And if you have half your subcontractors in a job kind of using your platform, the other half aren't really using it, it all falls over, in my opinion.
Yeah. I think it's integration is going to be key here. And, he's like, we're building, and there's a great example here, actually. We're talking about the problem, yet us sitting on this call probably have an opportunity to make life a lot easier. You've got a platform with a lot of subcontractors on it. We've got a platform with a lot of subcontractors on it, and we work in like completely. We don't talk to each other from a business sense of view, but actually, if we integrated and done more around integration, we could probably create this ecosystem whereby you've talked about Vinny there. Vinny of Mevercam is doing something, and Padraig down with an Adjust, and we've got all these different platforms going on, all solving these individual problems that are absolutely necessary to be solved. But if we actually integrated them, it would make life a hell of a lot easier. And I do think that as this rolls out, we're probably going to get more people coming in fixing, like, we just do cost. You're more around the the compliance side of things and creating that relationship between the subcontract main contractor. Brilliant problem to be solved. That needs to be solved. We don't do the cost, and then you've got Vinny doing some really cool stuff over there. If we could get everything talking together, brilliant. I actually do believe that the key will be integration of all these systems as they're being developed out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, integration is key. So whether it's integration between, the companies like ourselves, which I think is really important, or we integrate with, the bigger platforms, whether it's Autodesk or whether it's Procure or whoever it might be out there, that there's integrations. But those integrations can take a while to come along, but they're really key to joining up all the dots between all the systems. But I do think that, main contractors are becoming more aware that if they are going to implement something, that it works for their supply chain, it works for the subcontractors. And that's really encouraging to see, because one of the questions we get asked most regularly is, how does this work for the subcontractors? And that's really great to hear that they're actually thinking that way, because they need them, they need the subcontractors to work with the system. And so we spend a lot of time in making sure that user experience, it works for the subcontractors, and that it's actually easier for them to engage with a main contractor through Soy Passport than to do it the old way. Yeah. And that for me is the difference. There's got to be something in it for me. It's like, what's in it for me as a subcontractor? I'll engage with it begrudgingly because you're telling me I have to do it, as the main contractor's telling me I have to do it. But I would just use it, no problem, if it just made my life a little bit easier. So that's the name of the game. It's all about the user experience. But as you say, it's all about joining up the dots through integrations as well.
Yeah. What's the plan then? Where do you see this go? Are you currently, you've got obviously activity on the Irish market. Have you got activity over in the UK at the moment yet?
We certainly have had some interest from the UK, and we certainly have some interest from Irish contractors who operate outside of Ireland about bringing our services over to the UK. And that's definitely something, that we will be doing. We had thought it would be sooner, but given COVID and everything else, taking a bit longer. Yeah. But I would say within the next 12 to 18 months, we will be offering our services outside of Ireland. But, we really want to make sure that before we do that, we have it really nailed down, so that when we do go abroad, it is a case of bringing a very well-rounded, perfected, solution that has all that user experience and all that stuff built into it that we know works and that people buy into it. And listen, we'd like to expand, into Europe, into the States, different countries. But, a lot of that at the moment we're doing is sussing out, what countries will be a good fit for us. So it's a bit like, we're talking earlier on about, main contractors and subcontractors, it's got to be a good fit. So, we're trying to do as much research as possible to make sure that if we're going to go and put boots on the ground in another country, that we know it's going to work. Yeah.
But you definitely heading out there with the global ambition anyway to push this out past Ireland.
Yeah, absolutely. And this Enterprise Ireland are great at kind of pushing you to do that, but also supporting you in doing that. So, we have plans to certainly go further afield, and we are talking to main contractors and subcontractors who are international, companies, likes of, Lend-Lease and companies like that, who essentially, no matter how big they are and how many billions of amount of work they do, they still have these fundamental problems about how to manage their supply chain, because they know that it's the lifeblood. Supply chain is their lifeblood, and if they can manage that in a better way, it just makes sense for business.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest learnings for me, from a personal point of view, is that we have the pleasure, and it is a pleasure to say that we operate with customers here, UK, Australia, a bit of New Zealand, and a bit of South Africa. And it is a pleasure because you get to see all the different business types coming into one solution that you've put together. And what's been a big indicator to us is how it's just a global set of problems, and they're very, very similar set of problems. There isn't much difference between how we operate here versus how that same company are operating in London versus Sydney versus however, Johannesburg, whatever it might be. They're still dealing with the same set of issues. Yes. As Niall says, my co-founder and Niall says, it's the same shit, different weather.
Absolutely. Yeah. You say same shit, different shovel, but you know, it's like, it's true, you know, it's different weather, and you know, construction is fundamentally about building things, and you know, and in most countries, the setup is you've got the big main contractors who then outsource the work to subcontractors. That's how it works nearly the whole world over, and you know, the problems are the same. You know, if you listen to any of the, you know, some good sort of American podcasts not around construction as well as your own, and you know, you get to talking to people, you realize people are talking about the same problems, and it's very interesting. But what's really interesting as well, Kieran, you've touched on what you were saying there, is that when you talk to all these companies, you know, you're the whole time bringing back that knowledge, and you're distilling it down, and you're baking it into your solution. So you're kind of going out to the whole world and saying, listen, everybody, tell me what your problems are. And then you're trying to say, okay, well, what's the commonality and what are the biggest problems? And then when you go back out to your customers, you're saying, like, this is not just a solution that has been developed on the basis of, you know, how Ireland thinks about construction or what is best practice in Ireland. We're building our solution on the basis of what's best practice all over the world.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting for us and as you as a company, but it's also really valuable to the customers that we're serving, that we're essentially going out and finding out, listen, what's best practice out there? How are they doing out there? And bringing the best of the best and baking it into our solutions, and then offering it back out to our customers.
Yeah, and that's the exciting part for me, is that if you get this right, you don't just get it right to fix the set of problems for Ireland, the UK. You're fixing a set of problems, and then it's about who from a business operational point of view can do this best, who can get the business right and who can scale the business right. But the solution part is really interesting, that once you get that product to market fit, so to speak, you're then ready to say, okay, now it's a game for who's best at scaling.
Yeah, you know, exactly.
So you know, who wins that game, which is interesting. Where can people learn more, Rob, about this? I'm sure we've a lot of people interested that would be looking for extra places to, especially on our subcontractors, would want to find other places that they can be found. Let's put it that way. And I'm sure they're really interested probably to speak to you. Where can people find out more about you and Soy Passport?
Yeah, I mean, you know, you can contact me. Anybody can contact me directly. You know, we're always open to talk to people. So, you know, my email address is just rob.fox@sitepassport.ie. You know, if somebody can just email me directly, you can go to our website, which is www.sitepassport.ie. And, you know, there's a contact us button there. You can get in touch. And listen, we're really happy to talk. And if we can help people, great. And, you know, if we can just provide a little bit of advice, that's good. Because, you know, certainly what I find with these conversations, Kieran, is that I learned something from all these conversations. The people I speak to generally will learn something from me. And if that's as far as it goes, great. If we can do business together, great. But it's always good to talk.
Yeah. No, that makes a ton of sense. And if anyone wants to get an intro to Rob, I'm sure you can contact me anyway direct, and I'll link people up. But I mean, you're certainly solving a big issue and something that could really help people going forward. Rob, really appreciate you coming on. Thanks for your time.
No, thanks, Kieran. It's been great. Good talking to you. We'll do it again.